Man, this book jumps right into the thick of things right away.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I know.
I wish the first book was similar.
Welcome to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And today we are discussing Chapter 1 of Royal Assassin, Siltbay. And we got a friend in the background, our local lawnmower here, so if you hear anything, please excuse us. Starting off this chapter, though, it discusses the queen or king in waiting and their tasks and how they get their powers at 16. It was mostly to dissuade power grabbing from the young kids, and how the kings and queens who were in rule pretty much gave away all of the tasks that they didn't want to do anymore to their kids at this point. Chivalry, and then therefore Verity later, after Chivalry abdicated, got the tasks of like the borders, the boundaries, the war, diplomacy, negotiating things, pretty much everything that had long extended travel.
Mm-hmm. Well, because Shrewd is old, and
I'm sure, I mean,
yeah.
He seems like the guy that doesn't want to go out campaigning either. He's like, I'll sit at home and kind of pull strings. He and Shade are very similar.
Yes, true. But it is interesting because later we find out that basically what he's known for, what he did in his youth, is define the borders. So you would think that would be a lot more traveling than sitting back, but maybe it's not. I don't know. I've never been a queen, so.
Anything else you really want to talk about Shrewd with? Because then it moves on to Ketchikan here. And it speaks on how she is no longer very well received.
Yeah. I guess just that it's interesting to me that it just so happens that Shrewd's favorite son lines up so well with the qualities that Shrewd doesn't like to attend to.
That's true.
And so I wonder if it was really what he doesn't like doing, or if it was to bolster his son to give him a better standing, which backfired when Verity had to step in, because Verity isn't really talented in people in negotiations.
Well, in negotiations,
yeah,
he's talented
not like
with
diplomatic people.
Yeah,
he's a people's person.
Yep.
If that makes sense. But yeah, that was just a thought I had that I wanted to mention.
Interesting. But yeah, Shrewd's plan worked briefly, but then, since it's wartime between two nations, and I'm sure there's a ton of nationalism going on with the Six Duchies, this foreign queen comes in and she's no longer really welcome, and she seems just way too out there and different than the Six Duchies, so the people there can't relate. They don't see hope in that. They
want to make Buckkeep great again.
Yeah, yeah. And assuming that this is Fitz writing this part, we don't know for sure, but I'm kind of going on the assumption it's Fitz writing most of these blurbs unless otherwise stated. It says that in peaceful times, perhaps she would have been received with more tolerance, but the court at Buckkeep seethed with the general unrest of the Six Duchies. And that, like, kind of makes sense. I mean, it was such a long shot for, like, oh, everything's going to be fine after this wedding. Which, I mean, it was for the wedding festivities and for a few months afterwards.
I think it would have even been fine if there had been no winter attacks.
That's true.
Because the joy of the occasion wouldn't have been tainted with the horrors of war. And so I really think that a lot of this has to do with the rising tension of we're not even safe in the winter, which is a big development, because up until this point, they were safe during winter. So it kind of would throw you off balance because nothing is certain anymore. And so even the normal patterns that you've gotten used to, even if they're horrible and you lose a ton of people, at least it's only in spring and summer.
Right.
And now it's all of the time. I don't know. So I don't think that helped.
Definitely not.
But also we know that Kettricken has different ideals, and just a general different way of presenting herself. She's kind of soft-spoken. I mean, she's a very strong woman and knows what she wants to do, but she's not used to court intrigue.
And it's a different language.
There's a language barrier.
Yeah.
And so I think she's just really calm, and that's probably not the most fashionable thing to be for a lady at this point in time.
That's probably true, yeah. And it says that King in waiting Verity, convinced that his skill was no longer sufficient to hold the raiders at bay, put his attentions to building warships to guard the coastal duchies, with little time for his new queen. And it kind of goes over that, like, Regal was also vying for power, and, the inland duchies don't want to pay taxes. Everything we've kind of gone over in the past book. There's still a little bit of the recap in this blurb that was more present in the prologue last episode. And overall, King Shrewd is pulling the strings, trying to keep his sons in balance and the kingdom, relatively at peace during this wartime.
Yeah. And it does mention King Shrewd. It says he's crouched like a great spider. And I just wanted to point out this imagery because this spider imagery is, in later books especially, is typically ascribed to Chade.
Chade, yeah.
And I just think it's interesting. Last book, there was also a mention of King Shrewd being spider-like. And I think there was a Chade reference as well that was less like said spider, but it was more implied like he has webs.
Yeah.
But I just find it interesting that the brothers are very similar. And I think that there's really subtle ways that are brought up that I just kind of like the second time through.
They pull the strings. And then last episode we had Fitz falling asleep in front of the fire, sitting down, staring into the flames, relaxing completely and letting down his guard, and he was skilling. And he wakes up in somebody else's body.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't know that yet.
He doesn't know that. He wakes up very confused because he sees the Fool in front of him. And the Fool is wearing green and red, just so you know. Like I pointed out last episode, Fitz got dressed in, a green pants and red shirt, and he's like, I'm dressed more brightly than the Fool ever would, even.
Yeah.
But yeah, he doesn't know that he's in Shrewd's body. He's skilling into Shrewd's mind right now and taking control of his body at the moment.
Yeah, and so when he first opens his eyes, like we said, the Fool is there, but I think it's interesting to point out that he's not just mentioned as the Fool, he's mentioned as King Shrewd's Fool.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because this is the first chapter in the second book. So it's like to remind you that technically the Fool is owned by King Shrewd, which is like gross when you think about it. But like,
a lot of those relationships back in feudal times.
Right. I just, I hate it when like he's owned by somebody.
Possessive.
That's just, yeah. Anyway, so we're reminded who he is, but I just thought it was interesting. Maybe like a little bit of touch of, I'm in the palace, I'm King Shrewd right now, but I'm not. Or maybe that's, like I said before,
could be
just a way to remind you.
Yeah, it could be a hint towards the reader, but I don't think it's directed at Fitz, or Fitz is thinking that. I think it's mainly directed at the reader. One, to give a little clue, like,
hey, remember this person?
Yeah, this is, King Shrewd's place.
Which, how could you forget the Fool? But.
Yeah. And two, that it's, the first chapter of the second book. So, but yeah, he's very surprised, stares at the Fool wildly, and the Fool kind of like recoils a little bit and is startled by that look, because the Fool thinks it's just King Shrewd. And through this whole chapter, the Fool just thinks it's King Shrewd and is answering him.
Yeah. Which I think kind of speaks to the level of deterioration there is with King Shrewd's mind, that the Fool doesn't once suspect that this could possibly be anyone else, which granted, he doesn't know much about how the skill works.
True.
But still, the fact that some of the things that Fitz is going to say is very much like, I'm not King Shrewd, this
dementia,
isn't me, I'm not here. Yeah. And so the fact that he's sad but not surprised is very telling.
He's a little bit worried about it. It seems like it's almost worse than normal in just some of the reactions that Hobb writes down about the Fool. But yeah, like you said, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Shrewd is acting like this. It's really tells.
Yeah, which I think it's a good detail. Just little detail.
Yeah, definitely. When I read this chapter the first time around, I was so confused until the end of it. But it really is well done once you know that Fitz is occupying and controlling Shrewd's body. Shrewd cannot hear what Fitz says out of his mouth. I don't know. It's weird.
It's very unclear because sometimes Fitz isn't in control and it's all Shrewd. Mm-hmm. But we actually don't. There's no indication that Shrewd can't hear Fitz.
Later on in the conversation about Molly, there's like a back and forth that makes me think that he can't hear some of the comments.
Interesting. I just think it's
I'll
really
point those out when we get there.
Yeah, definitely do. No, I just thought it was really interesting that there's no. It's almost like a dream, like a real dream where you are dreaming you're somebody else, and then suddenly things are happening that you have no control over, and so I don't know, very interesting.
Yeah, but we're occupying the king's body, and he is not doing well. His bed is soaked. He's sweating during the night, pretty much the whole night. He knows that like he's been sick at some point in the past, and he's like telling the Fool, "Hey, I didn't expect to see you here." And the Fool, this chapter gives us the best insight on Shrewd and the Fool, first of all, but Shrewd's feelings in general.
Right.
Because we're inside of Shrewd's mind for like the only time, which is also a very clever thing that Robin Hobb does. This is a first person narrative, but this magic allows you to be inside of somebody else's head and gives you, a little bit of their thoughts and their feelings towards certain subjects and things like that. And it really shows an unguarded King Shrewd, which we never get beyond this chapter, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe in some writing, but I don't think, or a little bit in Tales from the Fool later.
Right.
But just barely anything.
Never like a first person King Shrewd in depth as we get in this one.
While he still has a little bit of his mind to him.
Right.
Especially.
But the Fool is extremely caring. He's extremely worried about King Shrewd. They obviously care for one another. And he's just like, lie back,
He's fluffing the pillows.
Yeah, he's fluffing the pillows. Like,
he offers to change the sheets.
Let me make you comfortable, all that sort of thing. And Fitz in his head, which this is like one of your first tells, he has a thought. He's like, I knew I could ask the Fool to change them, the sheets or the pillows, and he would, but I would just sweat anew if he did. It was useless. And that's one of the things, like, that's not Fitz's thought. That's Shrewd's thought, like, intruding on everything.
Yeah.
And before that, like, he has, like, an embroidered nightshirt, and there's a couple, like, little hints in here that something isn't right, but Fitz is just kind of, like, taking it in stride because he thinks he woke up, and this is how it is now. I don't know. And
it's hard to tell his thoughts from Shrewd's at this point.
Right, exactly.
Because he's not expecting there to be anybody else's thoughts in his head, I'm sure. But also, there's even a point where he glances down and sees an embroidered nightshirt and rich bed covers. And it says, something seemed odd about them. I was too tired and weak to puzzle it out.
And that's like Fitz intruding thought about like, this is wrong, but Shrewd's mind is like, no, this is right. So something seemed odd about them, but he's like, I'll just brush it off. It's fine.
That's not important.
There's two different realities. They're kind of colliding there in their thoughts. And the Fool goes on to talk about Shrewd's weakness and his sickness and everything. And he says, Fitz asks the Fool bluntly in Shrewd's body, why have you come here? And the Fool says, my lord, I mistrust this sudden weakness. You seem to take no good from this healer's ministrations. I fear that his knowledge is much smaller than his opinion of it.
Sick burn.
Yeah. Beric, I asked incredulously. Obviously, Fitz thinking that the healer is talking about Fitz's healer, Beric. And the fool is like, would that he were here, my lord. He may be the stable master, but for all that, I warrant he is more of a healer than this Wallace, who doses and sweats you. Obviously, Fitz is very confused about this, and it makes the fool seem like, oh,
yeah,
he has like a dementia or something.
Yeah.
The fool's face grew graver. No, my king, he remained in the mountains, as you well know, speaking of Beric. Your king, I said, and attempted to laugh. Such mockery. Never, my lord, he said gently, never. His tenderness confused me. This was not the fool I knew, full of twisting words and riddles, of sly jabs and puns and cunning insults. I felt suddenly stretched thin as an old rope and as frayed. Still, I tried to piece things together. Then I am in Buckkeep? He nodded slowly. Of course you are. Worry pinched his mouth. And Fitz, of course, gets mad here because he's a teenage boy and he's like, wow, I was returned against my word, like without my knowing.
Which also
betrayal.
Zero realization that it's a like several week long journey. And he would have had to been passed out the entire time, which is probably not feasible. But
yeah, the fool then's like, hey, you always feel better after you eat. I've kept food warm for you. Fitz thinks about like the mountain food that he's had. He hasn't had beef in a long time. It's beef stew, and like, oh, we only have venison and stuff up there. And he recognizes that this was the king's bedchamber now. Yeah. He's like, okay, this is the king's bedchamber. Why was I here in the king's own bed?
Yeah. Oh, Fitz.
I tried to ask the fool, but another spoke with my lips. I know too many things, fool. I can no longer stop myself from knowing them. And he says more that I want to talk on, but that line right there, I think, is a couple different things. One, we know that the king's skill isn't all that it used to be. Last book, it was described as like burned out and blunted and not as, well used and practiced as it should be.
Right.
And in this chapter, in this book, he doesn't have a lot left. One, because it started to get drained later. But two, in this chapter itself, it could be because of sickness, but he doesn't have a lot of strength to do it for very long. So I think it's somewhat of his skill wandering and like, checking in on people without his knowing. And some is like the intruding thoughts of like, I think Shrewd heard Fitz thinking about the Mountain Kingdom's food. He's like, the same way that like,
right.
I know the fool would change my sheets, but it would be useless because I'd sweat through them right away. So like Shrewd is hearing, oh, beef stew, that sounds wonderful. I know in the Mountain Kingdom they only get venison. Yeah. It's like, why do I know these things?
That's a good thing to point out.
Sometimes it is as if another controlled my will and pushed my mind where I would rather it did not go. My walls are breached. It all pours in like a tide. Has this happened before, do you think? Or is it just his skill spilling out and like, or him trying to warn the fool like, my wall defenses have been breached? Or is it just like him in general speaking of like, I can't really contain myself and I go everywhere and I'm not all that I used to be?
Well, I guess I have a question before I answer your question.
Sure.
Do we know when Will starts draining? No, it's not.
I don't think we do. I think it's Will.
Okay. I thought so too.
I'm not positive, but I think it is.
So we don't know for sure. We just know that he does.
Yes.
But we don't know how long it's been.
Right. It could have been just that night that they were going to kill Shrewd. I guess we'll figure out on this reread. I just don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't think it was right away.
Because my thought in this is that Will has been poking around. Earlier, we have we know that now there's the plan in place of weakening Shrewd with the faulty healer who isn't doing anything to help him. It's only making him worse.
Right.
But I think this speech of my walls have been breached, something's wrong. I saw this as Will has been poking around and maybe he just started getting the walls down. Like he's not taking a ton yet, but he's like finding the holes in the defense to get it out easier.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that maybe this is why he's skilling at random and it's erratic, because he has no control of his walls being up anymore because somebody's broken through them. And I say that because Will isn't skilled. I mean, he is, but he's not a skill master. He hasn't been trained properly. So in my mind, he's done something wrong to where instead of like sneaking in through the back door, he's left the back door open even when he's not around.
Right.
And so before, when we saw Shrewd couldn't even be reached by Fitz when Fitz was hammering, now that wall isn't as sturdy. I don't know.
No, that makes sense to me. That'd be a good thing to look out for, to see how early Will has been doing stuff.
Yeah. How shady he's acting.
Yeah. And this rising tide, or it all pours in like a tide, kind of gradually shifts to a skill vision that Shrewd is falling into, and he sees raiders coming towards Siltbay, towards a small village. Even through winter, there hasn't been really the winter storms. Winter was really, light on everything. It says winter has crept in too softly. She has spared us both her storms and her protection. And he points off into the distance. See, do you see? And the fool comes over and loyally puts his hand on his shoulder and looks where Shrewd is pointing. And obviously they're in this chamber and only Shrewd can see this, and Fitz, because he's along for the ride. But it really goes to show how concerned and how side by side and a partnership they are.
Right. Well, this scene also makes me wonder two things. One, if the king has had false visions before. And so the fool's kind of playing along to see what's going on, to check on, just because he's potentially looking at nothing. And we know that Shrewd is kind of losing it at this point. So maybe there's a chance that some of his visions are wrong. It's just his own mind playing tricks on him.
Maybe.
But also my other thought was, I wonder if the fool is touching him to kind of ground, looking at the path. He's trying to see which version of the future we're on, or which path we're on to the future, and which version of that has a winter attack.
Right.
So I was just kind of wondering if that could also be part of why he plays along. Definitely
could be. I really don't think it's the Shrewd is having false visions or anything. I don't think he's that far gone yet. I really don't. I don't believe that. I would be more likely to think that Shrewd has had just skill visions before, and has been looked in on that. I don't think Shrewd has had hallucinations or anything like that before, and I don't think he's, that mentally impaired yet.
Right.
Well, it's more physically, because he's sick and it starts to wander, and he gets duller because people are messing with his brain.
Right. But I mean, I'm just saying, I don't think every once in a while having a false vision means that he's worse off. Just that there's a possibility that because his brain is slipping, that occasionally he loses lucidness.
Right. I just don't think that has happened
fair.
Personally. I don't think he's lost that many faculties yet, in my own read, at least.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a lot worse than I remembered it being so early on. So,
I mean, with this looking at it, it's also, I mean, yeah, it's bad, but it's also the mix of Fitz and him in one brain at this point, and he doesn't know that. So I think it seems a little bit worse.
That's fair. Well, but I mean, before this, Shrewd had nothing wrong with him as far as we knew. So this is way worse than it he seemed last book, I guess.
Who knows what poisons they were putting in? Because obviously Regal's plan was marry Ketrican, get rid of Rurisk, get rid of Verity, weaken my father.
Right.
And eventually kill him.
True.
That's why, like, Wallace was probably set on that path before even.
But I mean, Regal is there right now, so it makes me wonder if, like, this is Regal's backup plan.
Could be.
Or if this was already set in motion, like you said. I don't know.
It was probably planned out, but when he got back, he set it in motion. That's what I would think. Like, it's like, oh, this would be the next step in it. Might as well keep going because I can still turn this to my advantage. I don't know. Because Regal's ever the optimist.
That's true. Well, I mean, he didn't get in trouble for trying to kill his brother, so what's to stop him?
All right, so this vision is 2 red ships coming into Siltbay. Everything's quiet. The guards are asleep, and they die in their sleep. And it's a sincere tragedy here. Hob goes into a lot of details about things that are happening to the village. I don't really want to go over closely too many because honestly, it's just people dying. Yeah. In different ways.
Right. I do want to say that the Out Islanders come quickly and quietly. Because they're professionals, and it just shows that they've done this so many times.
Yeah.
They have incapacitated the watchtowers ahead of them getting there. So somehow they have sent somebody on land ahead of them and know where the watchtowers are and how to get to them and get to the people watching. They also have rags tied on their oars so they don't even alert anybody who might just be walking around at night in the village. Like, this is a professional job. I think that those little details are important to point out, because up until this point, we don't really know how they're getting in and like how they're getting past the guards. And I think this is a good look at these people have an insight. They have to have some sort of inside person telling them information,
right? Because
how else would they know where the guard tower is? And I mean, I guess maybe they just know, but I don't know. I just find that those parts really interesting and how they're working and getting past all the defenses.
Yeah, definitely. And Siltbay, it goes into a description of how Siltbay sure is prepared. They have guards or whatever, but they never thought that raiders would come to them because there's nothing really there of value for them to take, but these are the red ship raiders and they're not there for material goods.
They have good wool.
Yeah, they have good wool.
Is spun into fine yarn.
So Shrewd is watching, and he watches them kill the crews of the ships that are there, go through town, and he takes a break to talk to the fool.
Before he talks to the fool, there's a line I wanted to point out. They trickled silently up the streets in bands of 2s and 3s, as deadly as poison unfurling in wine. And that's kind of a Fitz imagery there.
Yeah, it is.
So it's just, I thought, a really neat little, this is also Fitz watching.
Right.
And maybe the king would also think like that, but I feel like that's a little bit of Fitz's voice coming through, and we're seeing it the way Fitz would also see it.
More mingling of the two of them. Which is, it's super interesting that we lived in Fitz's mind for a full book, and Shrewd, we've never seen part of his mind, like, ever.
No.
Like, except for like one sentence when they were skilling or something at one point. But you can kind of pick out what's different with Shrewd's thoughts and Fitz's thoughts by just like seeing descriptions and how they think about things. It's cool. But he describes himself as, I could do nothing except watch. I coughed heavily, then found a breath to speak. If only I could understand them, I said to the fool. If only I knew what they wanted. There's no sense for them, and, if only I could understand them, and he's kind of just hoping for it. But the fool obviously isn't just like a mere servant. He's like there to discuss with Shrewd, and they might have even had this discussion before. He pursed his pale lips and considered. They partake of the madness of he who drives them. They can only be understood if you share that madness. I myself have no wish to understand them. Understanding them will not stop them. I was wondering if you think that the fool knows of Kebble Rawbread. They partake of the madness of he who drives them, or he just thinks that it's a nameless, these people are crazy, why would they just do this? There's no sense in understanding them. Or do you think he's seen like a little bit? Because he doesn't know the pale lady is there.
Right. I think if he knew more, he would have said she.
Right.
I think this is just a general he, or maybe he does know about Kebble just because the king should know about the leader, right? Or do they not know yet?
They don't know all the leaders because there's so many different. They don't have a central government,
right?
So they might have like a list. Yeah, they might have a list of royal or like quote unquote royal families or like clan families, but they probably don't know.
But Kebble isn't even royal, so he wouldn't be on the list. Yeah,
right.
I think this is more of a general he, or maybe it's a little bit of knowing he. There's potential that Kebble is written about,
right?
Especially because he's used as a catalyst. So it wouldn't surprise me if, the fool knows a little bit. But I feel like if he knew that much information, even if it was just a name, he would have told Shrewd. And if Shrewd doesn't know, I don't think the fool knows. Just from this interaction of how close they are, it seems like the fool doesn't really hold anything back.
The next couple pages here really highlight what we've discussed in the past about Shrewd and how he seems kind of heartless and like callous, and he's just, using tools for the betterment of his power of the Six Duchies and stuff like that. But it really shows his empathy for his people and how he really wants everyone to, prosper.
Right.
And how helpless he feels right now.
Yeah.
He says, I did not want to watch the village. I had seen this nightmare too often, but only a heartless man could have turned away as if it were a poorly staged puppet show. The least I could do for my people was watch them die. It also was the most I could do for them. I was sick and a cripple, an old man far away. I'm wondering if this line, I was sick and a cripple, an old man far away, no more could be expected from me, so I watched. Do you think that's a blend of the two of them?
I think it's a blend. I think it shows how they're definitely related.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this chapter illuminates that as much as Fitz is Chivalry's son, he's also Shrewd's grandson.
Mm-hmm.
And as hard as I am on Shrewd, I know that he cares about his people in his own way. I just don't particularly subscribe to the way that he goes about caring for them.
Right.
But I can acknowledge that he is a compassionate person. I do think this is
like specifically literal intermixing of their thoughts. Right.
But also the whole idea of I should suffer because they're suffering. There's nothing else I can do but share in their suffering is such a farcier thought. Like, you don't have to suffer with them. And
farcier thoughts. The worst kind.
It's just, I don't understand why he can't just tell Verity now. Don't watch it anymore. Tell Verity now, and Verity can watch.
But the more information that you can get, he and Chade are so much alike.
But the thing is, you're not getting any useful information out of this. So
if he told Verity now, what was he gonna do in the 5 extra minutes that he has?
I guess I don't know. But I mean, it's not as though there's nothing he could do in this moment besides watch. And I don't think watching this horrible thing happen to your people, or like choosing not to watch it, is a weakness, which Shrewd seems to think it would be, that it's heartless to not watch. I think it's fine to
spare yourself some gruesome scenes.
Not give yourself nightmares, but I mean, I'm not Shrewd, so
there are very in-depth descriptions, not literally down to like details, but it's a horror scene,
right?
Is what's described. It's basically
people murdering others for no reason, which is part of the reason why it's really hard to read.
Well, and also people murdering their family for the reason of not to be captured by these other people.
Right. It's very sad.
It's extremely sad. It is hard to read. And houses are on fire and screams are rising to the night sky as if born on the smoke. And then comes a very interesting passage between Shrewd and the Fool, which we've also talked about in the past. And that's how much Shrewd knows of the Fool, and what he keeps him around for, what he uses him for, basically, what's his tool. And he commands the Fool to remember forward. And I'm sure that's how the Fool has described it to him. It's like, I see pretty much what's going to happen in the future, but there's different chances, so I'm just kind of like remembering possibilities.
Yeah.
It's like, what do they say about Siltbay? A raid on Siltbay in winter. And the Fool says, it's not easy nor clear. All wavers, all is changed still. Too much in flux, your majesty. The future spills out in all directions there. And that just like goes to show that, and a couple passages later, that the Fool has spoken to him in depth about how this works. That like changes are happening all the time, that changes what I see in the future. Like they've actually had like very in-depth conversations about this, and Shrewd has made use of this.
Yeah. Which really calls into question why he still makes poor decisions. If he literally has a magic 8-ball that actually works at his disposal.
Yeah, but the magic 8-ball will show you 10 different things, and one of them is a good outcome, but you don't know which one that is until you pick one of the other ones.
That's fair.
It's basically just like a mood reader, because he's like, it's like, hey, what do they say about Siltbay? And then Fool gives him this feedback, like, they have a song about it. They sing it in taverns. This was a triumphant song because no one was captured alive to be forged. So he kind of knows what's going to happen. He doesn't know if that's like a good or bad thing, but he knows like, wow, crap, like the mood in the Six Duchies really sucks because that's triumphant.
Yeah.
That's a victory. I don't know. It just gives him like a little barometer on the future, more than he had before, I guess.
Yeah.
All comes down to knowledge. True. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. And like the Fool says in this instant, the future is spilling out everywhere. He can't tell what's going to happen for sure because, like Fitz, there are a million little things that can happen that you don't expect. It really just depends on the actions taken. And if he's not there to influence the actions, I guess he can't guarantee which outcome is going to happen.
Right.
So, fair enough.
This part is also where we explicitly see the Fool mentioned with future telling or, prophecies or anything like that. Last book we had a couple instances where he kind of said something and it kind of came true, and the sea purge really helped him, and that was obviously foresight of some sort. But this is explicitly like, Fool, think ahead. What are they going to say about this? And then him saying, one can imagine the brave stand these folks made, going down fighting rather than surrendering. Not one single person was taken alive and forged. Not one. The Fool paused. A hysterical note mingled with the levity he forced into his voice. Of course, when you're drinking and singing, you don't see the blood or smell the burning flesh. or hear the screams. But that's understandable. Have you ever tried to find a rhyme for dismembered child? Someone once tried remembered wild, but the verse still didn't quite scan. There was no merriment in his banter. His bitter jests can shield neither him nor me. He falls silent once more, my prisoner doomed to share his painful knowledge with me. And rereading this, the last few times, it makes me pity the fool so much to have to go through this kind of thing all the time. And he can force his mind away from it, but if he wants to help his savior and his friend, King Shrewd, Shrewd is going to make him do these things.
Right.
And that's why I think Shrewd mentions him as his prisoner, basically doomed to share his painful knowledge with me. Because Shrewd knows that it hurts him to do this, but also Shrewd needs him to do this in his mind. So,
well, I think it's interesting how their skills are mirrored in this instant. Neither of them wants to see, but both of them are seeing destruction. The fool on a greater scale because he can see every turn that might take every possible way of these people dying.
Right.
And I mean, that's not quite what Shrewd is seeing. He's seeing it in real time, which not great either. But both of them know they're helpless to what's going on at this moment. And so I think that might be part of their camaraderie. I mean, I guess before this, there wasn't a war. It's only been going on for 2 years, and they're presumably closer and have been for a while. This didn't bring them together as friends or whatever they are to each other, but
confidants at least.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's such an interesting relationship. I wish we got more of it.
Yeah, definitely. Hob goes into another description of basically, horrible things and atrocities. And this is all in the perspective of Fitz Shrewd, basically just Shrewd, watching all of this. And I think it's mostly Shrewd's thoughts through this as well. He witnesses in silence, basically. And then at the end, it's, I was not spared the knowledge. It was my duty to know all these things and to recall them. All the things that actually happened rather than the song that will be sung of these people making a stand and not being taken alive. It's of, terrible things, but included in that, the least of some of which are the best arrows that some of these villagers are shooting or killing their own family members from being taken alive as they're dragged away. And that's like the least of some of these descriptions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard to read.
Yeah. But he goes on and says not all died. Some fled. The young man took 4 children underneath the docks with him to cling to the water until they left. A woman in a nightgown slipped from a house. Flames were already running up the side of the building. She carried 1 child in her arms, and another clung to her skirts and followed her. Even in the darkness, the light from the burning huts woke burnished highlights in her hair. She glanced about fearfully, but the long knife she carried in her free hand was up and at the ready. I caught a glimpse of a small mouth set grimly, eyes narrowed fiercely. Then for an instant I saw that proud profile limned against firelight. "Molly," I gasped. I reached a clawed hand to her. She lifted a door and shooed the children down into a root cellar behind the blazing home. She lowered the door silently over all of them. Safe? No. And 2 raiders come around the corner. One of them was a laughing woman. One of them a man that immediately dies as the axe bites in and they tear open the door as Molly stabs him in the throat. And then the house collapses. And they don't see anything else. Fitz shrieks Molly through Shrewd's mouth again. Or at least in his mind, maybe. And the vision kind of pulls back. And with that leaping forward, because Fitz leaps again forward to try to, save Molly or something. Shrewd's body and Fitz's body both reach into the fires in their respective places and grab a coal.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the aftermath of that with Shrewd right now, where the fool isn't really surprised at this at all. "My king," the fool said woefully. He knelt beside me, carefully moved the soup by my knee, moistened a napkin in the wine, and folded over my fingers. Could not feel it for the void inside me, basically. The great wound inside me, Fitz kind of describes it as. All of a sudden, this next paragraph, "my burned fingers throb suddenly," and that's a switch from Fitz thinking about this and Fitz occupying the mind to Shrewd now, like, this is my body, my hand hurts.
Yeah, ow.
Yeah. What had I been doing? What had I been thinking? The skill had come on me like a fit and then departed, leaving me as drained as an empty glass. Remind you of anybody? Weariness flowed into me, and pain rode it like a horse. I struggled to retain what I had seen. What woman was that? Is she important? The fool seemed even wearier, but struggled to gather himself. "A woman at Siltbay," he paused as if racking his brains. "No, I have nothing. It is all a muddle, my king, so hard to know." And then Fitz kind of takes over again and says, "Molly has no children. It could not have been her." Then the fool replies, "Molly?" And then Shrewd comes back and's like, "Her name is Molly?" I demanded. My head throbbed. Anger suddenly possessed me. "Why do you torment me like this?" That's why I think Shrewd can't hear what Fitz says out of his body. Because it's one body. The fool is having a conversation with one person, but Fitz and the king are alternating lines here.
Right.
So Shrewd's like, "That woman, is she important? Who was she?" The fool's like, "There was a woman? I don't recall anything." And Fitz is like, "Oh, it couldn't have been Molly. She has no kids." And so the fool is like, "Who the heck's Molly?" "Molly?"
Who's on first?
And Shrewd is like, "Fool, didn't you just say that you didn't know who this woman was? Like, you don't know anything about a woman? Her name is Molly? Why do you torment me like this? Like, you said there was no one there, and now you know her name. Who is she?"
But he also remembered enough to know that, or to like have seen her or know that she's important.
Right. Yeah,
it's
that's
such
why
a weird...
it's the skill again.
Yeah.
Come on, where's that scroll about it? But it's that conversation right there in particular confused me on the first like 2 reads, and then I just like read it closer and I'm like, oh, okay. Gotta stop skimming stuff once in a while.
Gotta read deep.
But yeah, this conversation really, like, it gets to the heart of like, how is this skill joining working? Like, are you just straight up possessing Shrewd at alternating lines and they don't remember anything of it, but your memories are mingling together a little bit and there's a little bit of bleed over? We just don't know.
Right. Yeah, it's really hard to tell.
And then the fool says, "My lord, I know of no Molly. Come back to your bed and I will bring you some food." And then Fitz takes over again. It's like, "I have to know if that was Molly. I have to know if she is dying. Fool, I have to know." The fool replies, "It's not a thing I can command. You know that. Like your visions, mine rule me, not the reverse. I cannot pluck a thread from the tapestry, but must look where my eyes are pointed. The future, my king, is like a current in a channel. I cannot tell you where one drop of water goes, but I can tell you where the flow is strongest." And then Shrewd takes over again and says, "A woman at Siltbay," I insisted. Part of me pitied my poor fool, but another part insisted. Also, just before I continue on, in Shrewd's mind, fool is not capitalized.
Yeah. Because he knows that's not his name.
Yeah, I know. Fitz is the only one who really capitalizes it as the fool.
Yeah.
And names him.
Well, maybe that's partially because Fitz's name is literally
Fitz.
Bastard.
Yeah.
So
it's a label.
Like, isn't that name. Weird in his, it isn't that weird in his brain to have a friend that's literally just named Fool.
True. But yeah, Shrewd insists here, like, a woman at Siltbay, I would not have seen her so clearly if she were not important. Try. Who was she? Is she significant? Yes, I am sure of it. Oh, yes. And she's significant to Fitz, and that's why, with that skill joining, that thought, that forefront was directed to that woman.
Right.
And focused on her so much.
Yeah. And in the grand scheme, she's not the most important.
Right.
So, I mean,
she's important.
She's important.
Fits his story, of course.
Yeah.
But to this part of it, not really.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
This next part is one of the saddest sections for both the Fool and for the information that he relays. Because he's doing something that he doesn't like doing at all. He's focusing on, I don't even know if these are potential futures or if this is what is happening at the moment to a bunch of different women and just going through what is happening.
Right.
Because he lists a bunch of tragedies and terrible things that are happening to a bunch of different women in Siltbay at the moment or are about to happen to a bunch of different women, trying to find this one significant woman in Shrewd's eyes. And trying to find what happened to Molly in Fitz's eyes.
Right.
Do you want to cover anything in there or just kind of go over it?
I do want to point out, while the Fool is doing this, he kind of changes. His whole demeanor changes. And we see this happen over and over again whenever he is overtaken with his gift.
Yeah.
I think this is the only time we've ever seen him willingly go into this state and seek it out in any way. But he turns into the way he acts kind of around Fitz, where he's mean. He is talking in riddles, and he is being very blunt. He's not trying to sugarcoat anything. He's just telling things the way it is.
Yeah. And then ends it with like a joke almost. Mm-hmm. Like an actual King's Jester.
Yeah.
Joke.
A silly giggling seized him. Useless creature, silly riddling soothsayer. Well, he could not help what he was. I left him and walked slowly back to my bed. So this is something that happens, I guess, often whenever he goes into this state. I think it's really confusing to me.
Yeah.
Is this something that happens to every white whenever they go through looking at the future? Do they all become a weird version of themselves? I know the only other white we really see have visions is B in later books, and she does go into a daze, but I don't think she's ever described as being giggly and foolish. And I wonder if it's, specific to each person or the predicament they're in, or even just like how they view their skill themselves. Like for B, it's dreamlike because she thinks it's a dream. She's had all these dreams, and now she's just watching a dream come true. So she's in a dreamlike trance. Whereas the Fool thinks he's a fool. He's been told he's not really a white. Nobody that knows fully of his abilities believes he is a real white, that he is the chosen one.
Right.
So maybe because he feels like a fool, he has become that persona when using his gift. I don't know. I don't know if that's a real thing or just something I made up in my head, but yeah.
Yeah, he reverts back to something that is comfortable, and maybe it's just something to make Shrewd like say, oh, okay, he actually doesn't know, like, and just kind of put him off the track of like stopping him from forcing him to do something that he doesn't know, and he can't like keep trying. He just I don't know. And I was a little bit mistaken. He recites atrocities of what happens to women when Shrewd asks him again after this of what happened to her. This time he's just looking after the woman to see like what happened to her, and the Fool's like, I can't find anything, basically, and ends with that little joke. Did you know any such Molly, Ratsy? No? I didn't think you would. Perhaps he should ask someone more in a position to know. The worms, perhaps. Just making a joke that she's dead, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And, Shrewd / Fitz found themselves shaking as if with an ague. A seizure, I told myself. I must calm myself or risk a seizure. Did I want the fool to see me twitching and gasping? I didn't care. Nothing mattered except finding out if that was my Molly, and if so, had she perished? I had to know. And the fool tries to comfort Shrewd here and says that it's a very glad song, the one that they sing about Siltbay. Triumphant, That's how it is in the Six Duchies now. We kill our own so the raiders can't, and then we make victory songs about it. Amazing what folk will take comfort in when there's nothing else to hold on to. My vision softened. I knew suddenly that I dreamed. I'm not even here, I said faintly. This is a dream. I dream that I am King Shrewd. The fool responds, If you say so, my liege, it must be so. I, too, then, dream you are King Shrewd. If I pinch you, perhaps shall I awaken myself? And Fitz has a realization. He looks down at his hands and he's like, okay, I'm not myself. This is not me as 15 years old. This is what it feels like to be old and trapped in a body that isn't young.
Mm-hmm.
This is, not sick where you can heal. This is every month is the same. Every day is the same. There's no chance of getting better.
Yeah.
And then it switches to Shrewd again. I had thought briefly that I was 15. From somewhere came the scent of scorching flesh and burning hair. And then it switches back and forth multiple times here between the two. Mm-hmm. There's the rich beef stew. No, Jean-Cui's healing incense. Fitz is getting nauseous here. He lost track of who I was, of what it was important. And I don't know who says it, but I don't know. I whispered, I don't understand any of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then they kind of go back and forth, and Fitz kind of realizes, like, yeah, this is what it is to be King Shrewd. It's,
The fool brings it back by saying, as I told you, you can only understand a thing when you become it. Which is very interesting because the fool doesn't know he's talking to Fitz, but this is kind of what Fitz needed to hear. Fitz has really lost trust in Shrewd. He is thinking the worst of him. He thinks there's no reason for me to go back.
Right.
I am an old man, basically.
I'm useless now.
And here he is now fully experiencing real age and real pain that come with that age. And it is completely different. And also he's seeing the compassion that Shrewd has for his subjects and the pain that he has to endure every time there is a raid. Fitz says, I had never seen him like this, racked by the pains of age, but still relentlessly confronted by the pains of his subject. Is this what he must endure day after day? I fear it is, my liege, the fool replied gently.
Come, let me help you get back into your bed. Surely tomorrow will feel better. Shrewd replies, no, we both know I will not.
Yeah.
They came from King Shrewd's lips, and I heard them, and knew that this was the debilitating truth King Shrewd bore every day. I was so terribly tired. Every part of me ached. I had not known that flesh could be so heavy that the mere bending of a finger could demand a painful effort. And then Shrewd again demands, did she die there? The fool looks at him sadly and recites his list of what's happening or what happened or what will happen.
Just a lot of cruelty to all of the women of Siltbay.
Yep.
Every single one he's listing out. I mean, he doesn't get through all of them, but you could tell that if he was not stopped, he would just go down the list and he doesn't know any of their names. He doesn't know if this is the Molly that he's speaking of. He just knows this one died this way, this one lives but dies later. Like they're not good. It's not good news. There's not and this one lives happily ever after and actually slept through the whole thing and is fine. It's all horrible. It's terrible. And the Fool had to live through all of those things and is now reciting them again to his king.
Yeah. And Shrewd says, "Stop it. I beg you to stop." And asks, "Can't you tell me of the one woman I saw? I suddenly could not recall her name, only that she was very important to me." The Fool's like, I can't tell you. The only way to know would be to go there. If you command it, I shall do I shall do so. And Shrewd instead tells him to summon Verity. And obviously, like, both he and the Fool says so, know that they can't arrive in time to help fight, but they're going to be there to help douse fires and comfort people, and Shrewd wants them sent anyways.
Right. On a lighter note, Shrewd decides that he's not going to go to bed. He needs to stay up. He needs to be there for his people, even if he doesn't travel to
Siltbay.
Siltbay. Thank you. I keep thinking of it as Siltbay. So anyway, but it says he demands that the Fool brings him his robe and his buskins, which are a Mountain Kingdom type of shoe, which is specifically the type of shoe that John Quee gives to Burek, Fitz, and Hands on when they leave, the kind that are soft and formless. They're like leather. So I thought that was interesting that it's like remnants of maybe Shrewd is in Fitz's head a little bit, because this is definitely Shrewd speaking. Fitz knows this isn't his life anymore. But I just thought that
Shrewd has been to the Mountain Kingdom. Maybe he found them super comfortable.
True,
and just
maybe
wears them as house shoes.
That's definitely possible. But I just thought that was an interesting detail of maybe like a little slip of the tongue. I don't know.
But this is where that conversation that that point that you mentioned earlier of Shrewd subjecting himself to discomfort because his people suffer as well is here. It's like, shall I eat and be warm while bodies are cooling in the mud? Do you even and then the Fool is like trying to counteract that. He's trying to, make the king sleep and rest and, be healthy. And the Fool asks, do you think the discomfort you inflict on yourself will give even one child another breath, my liege? What happened at Siltbay is done. Why must you suffer? Why must I suffer? I found a smile for the Fool. Surely that is the same question that every inhabitant of Siltbay asked tonight of the fog. I suffer, my Fool, because they did, because I am king, but more because I am a man, and I saw what happened there. Consider it, Fool. What if every man in the Six Duchies said to himself, well, the worst that can befall them has already happened. Why should I give up my meal and warm bed to concern myself with it? Fool, by the blood that is in me, these are my folk. Do I suffer more tonight than any one of them did? What is the pain and trembling of one man compared with what happened at Siltbay? Why should I shelter myself while my folk are slaughtered like cattle? And the Fool has you could just, I could say 2 words to Verity and everything the same would happen. You can just eat and rest and it's the same outcome. And Shrewd kind of responds as in, just like straight up, no. I spent my youth defining the borders of the Six Duchies to any who challenged them. Should my life be too valuable to risk now when there is so little left of it and all of that riddled with pain? No, Fool. Fetch my son to me at once. He shall skill for me, since my own strength for it is at an end this night. Together we shall consider what we see and make our decisions as to what must be done. Now go. Go! He really has the sacrifice mentality. And, you know, on my first read through of this, I was like, wow, yeah, like when Kettricken named Fitz as a sacrifice, like you are a sacrifice to your people or whatever, I was like, wow, that's so powerful and stuff. But rereading this, the Farseers really do have that mentality ingrained in them as well. They are
the good ones too. Like.
Yeah, the good ones too. They are ruling for their people, for the good of the Six Duchies. And they take it not quite as far as the Mountain Kingdom does. But they all have that mentality in there, because that's exactly what this is. Although I think Kettricken would be eating and resting as well. And so would King Aod and Rurus, because there's nothing else that can be done.
Right. They're a little bit less, not compassionate, because they're compassionate people too, but
pragmatic about certain things.
Right. There's no need to cause extra suffering for no reason, because it's basically no reason.
But when I just want to point out when Fitz kind of realizes that it's, oh, this must be a dream. I'm King Shrewd or whatever, and I must be in his body. I think that's when Shrewd kind of like, there's something wrong here, and kind of like puts up walls and like distances himself a little bit.
I wonder too if this is why the vision goes softer, because it's not Fitz's eyes anymore.
Yeah.
Kind of like in Wit, whenever you can like see through a dog's eyes and it's more clear because dogs have better vision than humans.
Right.
Fitz is younger, and so doesn't his eyes are probably a better.
That's true.
Has stronger vision, even though it's not the same as like a dog versus human.
That's a good point.
A young person versus an older person who potentially has cataracts or just blurred vision from years of looking at maps. So I wonder too if this is more control being given to Shrewd. But also, my own strength for skill is at its end this night, is what Shrewd says.
Yeah.
And yet, here Fitz is. So is that just, is skilling into somebody else's mind something you don't need? That's all Fitz? All of this is Fitz's own ability?
I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
I think Shrewd has the visions with the skill, like the erratic visions, and sees things with the skill. Fitz was along for that ride, but I think all of the reaching out and touching Fitz's mind, Shrewd's mind, and going into Shrewd's brain and controlling his body, that's all Fitz.
Interesting.
But Shrewd kind of sits down and put his hands to his temple. I felt a painful smile crease my face as I found myself. So, boy, there you are. That's such an interesting phrase. My king slowly turned his attention to me. He was weary, but he reached his skill toward me to touch my mind as softly as blowing spiderweb. I reached clumsily, attempting to complete the skill bond, and it all went awry. Our contact tattered, fraying apart like rotten cloth, and then he was gone. I'm really curious as to what that would have been like if they could have actually gotten contact.
Yeah.
What conversations would they have had?
I don't know. Maybe Shrewd would have asked Fitz's opinion on what's going on, because he, like Jade, values different points of views. And Fitz is trained and could answer decently well. And also sometimes seeing things through the mind of a child or teenager in this case simplifies things down and gives you a perspective you hadn't thought of before. So I think Shrewd would find that valuable. Yeah. But I wonder if this broke because Shrewd is tired and maybe he tried to take control of it, and in doing so, that broke the bond. I don't think a wall was being put up. I think this is something else. Maybe Fitz's inability to
Fitz's
skill.
Inability.
Once he realized he was skilling, he's like, uh-oh, and it all shut off.
Because it says, I reached clumsily, attempting to complete the skill bond. So, like, we know from the training that in order to, like, bond, you have to both reach out and, like, grab onto each other.
Right.
In order to, like, fully, communicate that bond together. Shrewd did it very subtly, very skillfully. Not a lot of skill, but very skillfully, and obviously he knows how to do it. Fitz doesn't really know how to do it. He's only done it, like once before ever?
On accident, yeah.
Yeah. And he doesn't know how to complete that. So he does it with too much force, whatever, right. No technique, and just kind of blows the connection.
I wonder, too, if it's a little bit of they're not close enough. Because we know the skill is heavily based on your relationship with that person in real life.
Could be. But I mean, Galen was able to connect with Fitz.
Well, yeah, but...
They had that connection on purpose, too.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess that's like one way to skill, but I think the like connection of talking, especially with one person so low on energy, it would have to be a stronger...
I mean, it's blood bond.
Technically, yeah. I don't know.
I don't think... personally, I don't think it's the bond thing. I think it's Fitz just not knowing how to skill.
Okay.
That's just personal opinion. Definitely could be lack of bond, but I don't know. I think Fitz and Shrewd have known each other for a long time. They've had conversations more than what's on page.
Right. But it's not his king. Verity's his king.
That's
and
true.
He just was betrayed by Shrewd and knows Shrewd would willingly give up Fitz's life.
But like you said before, he gained new understanding tonight about like his compassion and like what he actually is thinking about things.
But that doesn't, I mean, you still might need time to process that before you like truly forgive someone for having you almost murdered. And I don't know.
Back to my original question, though, I have a comment about that of like what could have went on with those conversations. I'm curious to think, just, guessing about what might happened if they were able to have these conversations, that maybe Shrewd would listen to Fitz about what happened in the Mountain Kingdom. With the ability to skill, he might have Verity or himself teach Fitz, or like actually, like, oh wow, you are strong. We need somebody else to do this stuff too. Need all the tools we can get, and maybe put more training into the skill, maybe become closer with something. Maybe Fitz would gain, some semblance of mastery earlier, and then a lot of the stuff later on in the series wouldn't happen. I don't know. It's really interesting to me to think that if this conversation could have happened, they could have seen each other's minds. I mean, Shrewd could have probably just like said, hey, show me what happened, and then Fitz could have just like let him into his mind and his memories, and then
I don't know if anything would have changed, though. I mean, maybe he would have known that, hey, somebody really is messing with my brain via skill, and I need to have all of the people. I need Verity to check every single one of these skill users to see what they're doing. Especially with knowing how deep the corruption is with Galen and how he literally tried to murder one of his kids. Then maybe he would have taken that more seriously, or would have been able to have gotten Verity to take it more seriously, to say, I looked through Fitz's mind and I think this is happening. But Shrewd doesn't have that context, so he just feels like something's wrong, but he doesn't know what, because as far as he knows, nobody knows how to get into his skin. Who would dare?
Except for Fitz.
Right. But yeah, I don't know. So I don't know that he would like demand Fitz be trained better, or like, give Fitz more responsibility or anything. I think he would still keep Fitz at arm's length and keep Fitz at the skill ability that he's at now, because he has more pressing things to worry about with the war going on and his son potentially trying to usurp the throne. But also maybe he would have went along with it because he likes Regal better than Verity, so maybe it would have been one more obstacle for Fitz to face. I don't know.
I just feel like it's a missed opportunity for different things to happen.
Definitely.
I don't know.
A path closed.
Yep. So then the contact disappears after that failed trying to link each other's minds, and it goes back to Fitz in the Mountain Kingdom. He's on the floor of his bedchamber, uncomfortably close to the hearth fire. I was 15 and my night clothes were soft and clean. The fire in the hearth had burned low. My blistered fingers throbbed angrily. The beginnings of a skill headache pulsed in my temples. I moved slowly, cautiously as I rose. Like an old man? No. Like a young man whose health was still mending. I knew the difference now. When Beer came at first light to bid me farewell, I was ready to ride with him. He just sat and thought for the rest of the night.
Yeah.
First of all, this is where we see that Fitz also burned his fingers, blistered his fingers. I'm assuming that's because he reached in the fire, because he was right next to the fire when it happened.
Right.
So I'm assuming like the depth of that feeling and his strength in that moment made Shrewd move and his own body move and do the same thing. 2, the beginnings of a skill headache pulsed in my temples. Is this the first skill headache we see?
It is.
And it is so casually written, Robin Hobb, that we don't think anything of it. It's said with such like matter-of-factness of like, oh, this is what it is. It's a skill headache, capitalized skill. Like this happens all the time.
Yeah, except this is the first time it's happened, so it's definitely from his injuries.
And the first thing that we hear of a skill headache ever.
Right.
So like,
I wonder if the reason he's so sure that's what it is because through Shrewd, he was feeling a headache start to form. And so he just assumed like, oh, he got one too. And it's not his headache bleeding in. It was like, oh, because he used too much skill.
Right.
He also got a skill headache. That's just what it is.
So much leftover feelings from failing in the skill as well. And so much like inadequacy built into his psyche and self-esteem issues with the skill that I don't know. Like
yeah. Well, he's not going to ask anything about it.
I just wanted to point it out because it's mentioned so casually that the reader believes that it is something normal. And then later when we're like, yeah, you shouldn't get headaches, we're like, what?
Yeah. At
least I was. Like, I was reading through, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's right. First book, Fitz didn't have headaches.
It's an easy way to catch you off guard and be like, yeah, totally. Skill headaches, for sure. That happens all the time.
This is an absolutely tragic chapter.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned before, to me, this actually does read like a horror story. It's something you're locked in a body watching something happen far away, and you can't change it. You can't look away. It's terrible things happening.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
But this was really an important thing to happen.
Oh, very.
It gives Fitz the context of, I need to stop being such a whiny little baby. My life is not that bad. And I do not have it as bad as old people. Which is, I think, the main message we should be taking out of this chapter,
also,
right?
Maybe a bit ageist.
Right? Okay. Also a thought that I had, but I don't know. Maybe it's more lamenting that youth, there's so much more promise ahead. Whereas once you're old, you're old.
True.
I don't know. How old was Robin Hobb when she wrote this book?
No idea, actually.
So we'll have to look that up. But but yeah, I think this also plays a major part in Fitz as a whole. We already know that he punishes himself whenever he feels like he's done wrong or someone else has been wronged because of him. But I think this cemented the idea of no matter how bad I am hurting, I have to stand up for the people that I love and the ones that I love because his grandfather set that example for him.
Right.
And so that's why he keeps putting himself back in these situations of, I could die doing this, but at the end of the day, I'm doing it because I'm going to save my loved one. I'm going to help the people that need to be helped that I can do something about. And I think that's just an interesting takeaway to get from all of this. It could have gone any number of ways, but...
So is Fitz happy?
Definitely not.
I think he's hopeful, though.
You think so?
At least determined. At the end of this, when he decides to ride back, he thought his life was completely over. He was going to have to start again, and he was fine with that in his head. But I think he's hopeful for the future, at least in the fact that I can heal, I can get better in terms of himself.
Right.
I mean, he's obviously not happy about a lot of things that have happened,
right.
And
well,
potentially Molly maybe dying, and
a whole town was murdered.
There's a lot of things that he's not happy about,
right.
But I think he's more hopeful for himself. at this point.
That's fair.
Than he was at the end of last chapter, at least.
Definitely. And I don't know. He has better perspective. I think it was important for him to gain that perspective because
definitely
he wouldn't have sought to get that perspective on his own by his own means. So
thanks for listening to this one. It's a tough one to go through. Mm-hmm. There are more difficult chapters in the future. This was definitely an important one to read and go through and talk about because it marks a couple changes for Fitz's character, for insights on Shrewd and the Fool.
For what's happening in the war.
Yeah, and for what's happening in the war.
What's going on.
It definitely marks a different shift in the mood for the Six Duchies because, Verity can't skill 24/7 for a full year in a straight and then survive. So that shifts to, like it was mentioned earlier in the chapter, making warships instead. And a lot of things are going to be changing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions for us, if you have any theories of your own or thoughts on, what has happened in the previous few chapters or wherever you're at in the story, please reach out and let us know. You can email us directly or find us on social media. It is FitzHappy. And our email is at Gmail. So isfitzhappy@gmail.com.
Look forward to hearing from you.
Did you enjoy the break that we had?
Yeah, it was nice.
Anything special that you wanted to do that you got done? Just relaxing. Because I was happy to not have to edit for a while. So
yeah, I guess you do a lot of the heavy lifting. No, well, I still had to make memes, so
True.
I didn't get. I didn't really do anything that much different. So I guess all we've really done is pre-record an episode so we can be an episode ahead, which is nice. That'll be good for us.
More editing.
Holiday season is upon us. Spoopy season. It's my favorite season.
I wish we could have a Halloween.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That'd be so nice, but
Be safe, everyone.
Yes. As there's a plague at our door.
Hey, that's pretty spooky.
That is very, very Hallows Eve of us.
Everyone's
America's really getting to the spirit.
Everyone dressing up as plague doctors and things.
Yeah. I am trying to work on a new website, but we'll see how soon I can get that up. It's a lot of work, so
neither of us are experts.
No.
So.
This is
you are better than I am, though. That's for sure.
I've had a little bit more practice, but all of my websites have been private, so I've never...
A little bit more practice compared to my 0, so...
Yes.
Works out.
So hopefully that goes up soon.
We'll see. We don't want to promise anything.
No promises, but hopefully within this book series, we have a new website, but we'll promote that whenever it is up and running. So.
Hard goal for the next trilogy, we'll have a new website.
Soft goal by the end of this book, at least.
1 year from now, next year's Halloween.